Aleksandra Janus is author of many books and articles, and she's also a co-editor for book series Exhibiting Theory, published by Jagiellonian University and Columbia University Press. So, without further ado, I give the floor to Aleksandra, who will introduce speakers of the third session. Thank you.
Thank you, Małgosia. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you, Małgosia, for the kind introduction. This session is called Built Narratives, Multilayered Identities of Modern Architecture. And as we all know, architectural heritage is often used to tell stories about particular versions of the past, and in geographical and cultural areas where multiple groups have lived together and various political spheres have intersected, built heritage may consist of numerous historical layers and witness many deliberate aesthetic redesigns. For various reasons, these are not usually or not have been made equally visible. When we were programming this event and this session, we believed it's worth looking at examples of architectural heritage that bears witness to multicultural, multi-layered histories, as well as example of successful and unsuccessful, possibly, policies and practices on how this plurality can be expressed and made visible. So we'll start this session by a presentation by Dr. Marija Drėmaitė, who has a Ph.D. in architecture and works as a professor at the Faculty of History at Vilnius University. And she investigates architecture of the 20th century from historical, sociological, and anthropological perspective. She also authored a book, Baltic Modernism, Architecture and Housing in Soviet Lithuania, and many other articles and books. And she also was a leader of a nomination, Modernist Kaunas Architecture of Optimism, 1919-1939, for the UNESCO World Heritage Center. So the floor is yours. The presentation will be entitled, Is There East Central European Modernisms? The Multifaceted Case of Kaunas Modernism, 1919-1939. Please join us.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be back at Pilecki. I think I was here 2 years ago with still presenting this concept of architecture of optimism, but now I am really happy to announce that 2 months ago this nomination was already inscribed on the World Heritage List, so we have new modernist heritage on the list, and actually it's the only fully urban planning heritage that represents European urban planning and modern architecture in this full scale. I'm also very happy to be here because of this marathon of presentations, but we really see how people tell the stories, and built narrative is a very, very important thing still I see. Also, I would like to share some reflections from the first and second session. It is fascinating how in the first session, when we see those presentations together, how countries, politicians, heritage authorities, and public are still dealing with the Soviet colonial heritage. Maybe in different forms, maybe even not consciously, but it's so obvious. And I think that the second session, where this East-West divide is beyond, we can research architecture of these countries and of this period beyond East-West divide, is actually the future. It is very interesting, and it's very presents different or alternative approaches that we not need to suffer all the time or to claim for normalization of this architecture. But today I would like to focus on the problem, maybe, of the East-West divide, on the example of the different period, interwar period. And the question whether is it valid or needed or necessary, especially when we talk about the interwar architecture in Lithuania, in Europe. So why Kaunas and why architecture of optimism? Why we chose this this subtitle for the nomination. For me, the geopolitical context of Lithuania and Kaunas was very important because Kaunas, in this short period from 1919 to 1939, served as a provisional capital of Lithuania and represented what was happening in many post-imperial states of New Europe. And this optimism as a context, of course, it can serve as a very vivid period of architectural experimentation, but also construction, because Kaunas of the 30s reflects the modernist universal aspiration for a better future through rational planning and modern architecture and political, social, economic, and cultural optimism that flourished in the newly established European nation states after the collapse of empires and World War I. The new residents of Lithuania's provisional capital transformed the city into a modern and elegant European capital in less than 20 years. And I relied on this concept proposed by Martin Kohlrausch and Jan Behrens when they compiled this book, Races to Modernity, Metropolitan Aspirations in Eastern Europe. But that's a geopolitical context. And we might ask if it produces different modernism, some kind of Eastern Central modernism, immediately in relation to Western modernity. So to save our time, I want to use the opportunity to show 6-minute video where all these texts are concentrated with a visual representation, and to comment later about the problematics of it. So, yeah, please. You will see a couple of colleagues here.
Optimism is not a new architectural style. It is an outlook. There was no shortage of optimism in Europe between the two world wars. After the collapse of the great European empires, new independent states that appeared on the European map shared an optimistic vision of a more promising future. In 1918, the founders of the newly proclaimed independent Republic of Lithuania declared Vilnius to be their capital. 1 year later, however, geopolitical tensions and territorial conflicts forced Lithuania's government to quickly relocate to the country's second largest city. Kaunas took on a unique status, that of provisional capital, which led to the city's radical transformation. The status of capital city gave provincial Kaunas the opportunity to rapidly transform into a vivid, modern city, to free itself of imperial architectural symbols, change its urban environment, create new political centers, and construct new government buildings. The speed and scale of the transformation was extraordinary. Over 20 years, the city's area increased sevenfold. 10,000 new buildings were constructed, incorporating cleanliness, openness, and light. By the 1930s, Kaunas began to see the return of young Lithuanian specialists who studied architecture in Western Europe. Berlin, Rome, Brussels, Paris, Grenoble, Ghent, Dessau, and elsewhere, bringing new trends home with them. These modernists became a powerful collective force that shaped Kaunas' unique style, displaying a bold plurality of modern architectural expression. The creation of the capital city produced favorable conditions for manifesting a national style, which expressed the aspiration to shape the face of a new country. It was Art Deco, which allowed to put together two basic elements of national style: modernism and tradition. The celebration of medieval glory of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Baroque style and vernacular art had visible impact on architecture, especially interior decoration. A capital city absolutely needed landmark buildings. One of the most visible structures in Kaunas is Christ's Resurrection Church, built on the hill as a votive gesture of gratitude to the Almighty for Lithuania. The church fully corresponds to the innovative urban idea of a city crown, or Stadtkrone, promoted by the German modernist Bruno Taut. Visible from various vantage points around the city, this national pantheon and monument to independence continues to serve as a symbolic center and city landmark. An exceptional cityscape spatial structure emerged on the terraces of the Nemunas and Neris slopes. The residential district of Žaliakalnis was inspired by the garden city ideas promoted by English urban planner Ebenezer Howard. Drafted in 1923 by the Danish planner Marius Franssen and his Lithuanian counterpart Antanas Jokimas, the villa neighborhoods of Žaliakalnis reflect the active spirit of an era and the creation of a new way of life. Kaunas lost its status as capital after the onset of the Soviet occupation and the Second World War. As Soviet modernist trends began to reach Lithuania, it was the legacy of Kaunas modernist architecture which served as the basis in the 1960s for the emergence of new modernist buildings. Kaunas modernism is increasingly recognized within an international context. In 2015, the European Heritage Label was awarded to the phenomenon that is the provisional capital of Kaunas. The city has also been granted the status of a UNESCO City of Design. A new step forward was the designation of Kaunas as the European Capital of Culture for 2022, and the Modernism for the Future program, dedicated to the rapidly growing cultural heritage community. No less important are the changing attitudes of heritage property owners. Today, the authentic interwar spirit is becoming a highly valued feature in private interior spaces.
Okay, so now we can complicate the story a little bit. This happy story, although it was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in the last session in Riyadh, but it is interesting to test how the story that we designed and we narrated was met by the International Evaluation Committee and the World Heritage Center, because it was proposed under two criteria, criterion 2 and 4. And criterion 2 demanded to exhibit an important interchange of human values over a span of time or within a cultural area of the world on developments in architecture or technology, monumental arts, town planning, and landscape design. And it was conceptualized for Kaunas as the modern architecture of Kaunas, created between 1919 and 1939, represents a local inflection of international architectural modernism that reflects social, political, and cultural conditions of the context. It represents an exceptional example of an attempt at expressing the local character and national spirit of a country in a modern architectural form. Modernism in Kaunas occurred in a diversity of styles and inspired expressions of the modern movement in other Lithuanian cities, providing motivation for generations of Lithuanian architects throughout the 20th century, as you could see in the presentation of Vaidas Petrulis in The Exile in the United States. However, this criterion was supposed not to be met, and we were proposed to skip this criteria and to work only on the criterion number 4, which presented an example of the fixed time and period from 1919 and 1913, as a result of which illustrates a local version of the global project of modernity characterized by optimistic construction, continuity with the past, and integration of the historic urban context with the natural setting. My question would be the discussion on 2 recommendations by the International E-Commerce Evaluation Panel, advisory body to the UNESCO World Heritage Center, which look for me rather controversial, and what I want to stress when I comment on these. Recommendation A was define the model of modernization developed within Eastern and Central Europe and stipulate its key features in relation to Western modernity in order to situate the specific contribution of interval Kaunas within this framework. And recommendation number K propose a different name for the nominated property that will reflect the reconceptualization of nomination, whereas they found optimism, concept of architecture of optimism too abstract. So the first recommendation to my mind shows that what UNESCO requires is a rather one-sided, simple and clear story and the description of the outstanding universal value, but how multicultural, multinational, multifaceted and contested urban heritage can fit it. Should it be eliminated, or it can it be accepted? On the other hand, how the model of East Central European modernism can be represented in a material built form, what kind of buildings can represent that idea, and finally, do we really need that division any longer? Isn't it that so that post-war political division is applied retrospectively on the pre-war architectural heritage, architects of which were trained in Western Europe and brought these ideas? The second recommendation can be understood as a demand to avoid any political connotations and present an objective history, if an objective truth can be achievable. For us academic researchers, it is very complicated. However, can we avoid historical and political narratives in telling the architectural history of this new Europe, of the interwar period, in this period from 1918-39. So during the last UNESCO World Heritage session in Riyadh, it was proposed that each nomination should start from the concept and the narrative. So isn't it a contradiction that, in fact, when we have submitted the nomination, we were proposed to skip that narrative and concept. So that's my provocative ideas for discussion, and thank you very much. In any case, Kaunas is inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage list.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will now invite our second speaker, Professor Jasna Gallier. She's an art historian and professor at the University of Zagreb. Before joining the university, she worked at the Museum of Arts and Crafts in Zagreb as a curator of the collections of architecture and design. And she's also an author of various essays and monographs on architectural criticism, cultural history of periodicals, architecture photography, history of exhibitions and design. And she curated several exhibitions on architectural history, design history, and cultural history. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this introduction, and I would also take the opportunity to warmly thank to all the colleagues and organizers for having me here today. And let's start with this tricky question, lost or found. utopian reality of modernism in Croatian architecture of the socialist and post-socialist period. So this phrase, or not just a phrase, lost or found, or utopian reality are key words that are often working together in a symbolic way. But and that's the main reason why I chose exactly this contradictory and complexity and contradiction of these keywords to start the paper. So the topic of the paper is a critical redefinition of its modernity, precisely its role in shaping the socialist society in the period of the 50s and the 60s of the previous century, of creation within Yugoslav cultural and political and societal history. Taking the premise that tall modernism of the Khrushchev era was marked by a contradiction in attempting to create an alternative socialist modernism that differed from Western capitalism, while at the same time it used the forms of global Western modernity as its starting point. This presentation aims to examine the concept of the political and ideological framework, which provides an insight into the positioning architecture as a key sign of the relationship between modernity and socialism. So the aim of this presentation is to examine specific multi-layered roles of architecture in the context of cultural translation, representing architecture as a site of conflicting visions, meanings, and experiences. By doing so, it would aim to shed light on key aspects of its relevance, particularly the questions: did these practices create new perspectives of architectural production? And if so, how these sites generate dialogue in contemporary post-socialist architectural culture and its fate? So, excuse me. So already mentioned exhibition in MoMA, I would like to point out that in the context of creating and constructing narratives of the socialist modernism. So the Yugoslav model of socialism with a human face, which appeared to be extremely successful in the 1950s and 60s, found its architectural analogy in the concept of socialist functional city. To achieve this project, modernization became inseparable from democratization and general societal programs. This has generated numerous interpretative models, among which the phrase socialist modernism is one of the most common denominators used to decode a cultural and social identity of bygone political system. One example of how curating can be used is the exhibition Toward a Concrete Utopia, Architecture in Yugoslavia in this period, held in MoMA in 2018. This exhibition sought to use resemanticized theoretical and critical concepts to establish a new historiographical narrative of socialist modernism, which relied on patterns of continuity in the neo-avant-garde, as well as transfers of ideas and ideologies in the 20th century as a whole. Yet, considering the distinctive modernism that took root in Yugoslavia during the given socialist period, this model did not give us a clear answer to the provocative questions how this specific version, being part of post-war new humanist movements, so not between East and West, or its difference from other paradigmatic examples of socialist modernism, as we have seen today in previous presentation. There is a quite dense dynamic in the field. So in this process, the next case study I would like to point out is slightly different in interpretative model in a format of volume that resulted from a seminar at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. It researches alternative discourses of architectural and urban culture in a much wider context, attempting to conceptualize the dynamic of practice and not to manufacture the history of the city. So taking Zagreb's current status as a city in transition as a starting point, the main argument is that Zagreb has in fact been in perpetual transition for the last 150 years, and that insights into how to cope with instability can be gleaned from the efforts of previous generations of architects and urban planners. So the main signs of the transitional condition are found in the feeling for the city as a project. From the socialist functional city with its metropolitan forms to the establishing of urban rules in the chaos of 1990s transition. Such a reading implies a revaluing of the cultural legacy and the conceptualizing future urban practices. The dynamic of transition from the 50s and the beginning of the 60s to the present is well documented in the quite dense mediated images. Orson Welles' film The Trial focus is on a critical depiction of the ideology of progress that destroys small old houses and thus represents a self-criticism of conflicted, even subversive vision of the socialist city and modern architecture as a symptom of collective progress. These spaces are depicted as a dystopian world, which was the opposite to the dominant meanings usually ascribed to the architecture of socialist modernism. In this case, its empty space was a scene of anguish and hopeless alienation, featuring in the visual language of film noir. We find recollections of this critical interpretation of the city's and architecture's vision in a series of manipulative photographs of David Malkovich, who uses the trial as well as other photographs as kind of ready-made technique to form a collage with photographs, current state of the building, documenting or interpreting the current state and the current perception of this building, but not just the building, but the heritage of socialist modernism as a whole. So like most of the multifunctional centers for culture or education of like workers' universities we have seen today, this building that faced the loss of previous functions in the early 90s which became part of this dirty, neglected, unwanted memory and heritage. So, in effect, became a symptom of the deconstruction of these roles, and no appropriate alternative emerged in its place. One of the main arguments highlighted at that time was the very flexibility of the space, but no initiatives were implemented. However, urbanist seminars, frames of the metropolis, like very symbolic title of the series is also quite strong argument for that, held in the 1995 in the former Workers' University, demonstrates that the 1990s did not have an exclusively negative legacy in relation to this architecture and its memory. Guest lecturers included Kenneth Frampton, Hermann Herzberger, or Raoul Bunschoten. Among them, Herzberger was the most explicit in evaluating the architectural quality of this building as a space for the unexpected. So the architect's motto was not to create or define space, but to live it, to live the space. In the building of what was then the open university, but empty in a real meaning or use, he proposed the idea of as a core of structuralist concept of structuralism in architecture. So he defined it as a primary task as to create spaces for the unexpected, which instead of fixed contents facilitated a polyvalence. The next example I would like to point out is the former Children's Health Resort of Krvavica, situated on the Adriatic coast, which was used as a health complex for the children of the persons who were in military service. So it was designed in the early 60s and operated in its use till the late 1980s. And after that, became completely abandoned and invisible. So in the early 2000s, it was taken over by the government asset management agency, and instead of being revitalized and repurposed, total devastation of the complex followed. However, despite this, the building continues to inspire growing interest among architectural professionals as well as general public who are interested in not just exclusively profit. In the context of recent medialization of socialist modernism heritage, architectural photography plays a key role. More than any other, this medium documents objective reality by manipulating its image. A series of photographs by Wolfgang Thaler aim to reconfigure documentation and photographic fiction, uncovering the transformation in the environment from the early 60s to the present. This flaneur-like investigation focuses on discovering the ideological and social constructs of architecture. It is significant that the photographs mostly show spaces devoid of people. Yet, unlike the highly aestheticized architectural photographs in architectural journals, visual representation explicitly evokes the melancholy of these ruins, which serve as a reminder of the failed project of socialist society. In addition to its documentary appeal, the television series Slumbering Concrete, which examines the modernist architecture of socialist Yugoslavia, is intriguing because of its approach to the investigation of change and loss of the collective and personal memory as a result of radical social change. The experimental film, next, is the experimental film by the artistic duo Doppelganger from Belgrade, which portrays the derelict former health resort as a site of conceptualization and intertwining of significantly more complex meanings. The circular form of the architectural object is analogous to the cyclical repetition of text and image, which is further reduced and fragmented with each circle reminiscent of memory loss, material and symbolic. The visualization of the process of forgetting confirms the premise that in this intentional, programmed forgetting, it is the media that play a decisive role. And finally, more optimistic is case study of residential complex in Zagreb, designed by the architect Ivan Vitic. Among these optimistic possibilities of finding the way to reuse is typical bottom-up initiative of the tenants, of the professionals, of artists who are also medializing and communicating the quality of this architecture with the public, with society. But here we have this possibility of private ownership of the tenants, of the community who is really aware of this quality. The same architect designed the nicknamed the Cube or Red Cathedral are the nicknames of this complex, which is also the case of reuse, which is at the same time argument which clearly demonstrates that the political, ideological original use is not always the main obstacle for or excuse for abandoning and destroying the complex. It is widely popularized and propagated during recent last years as a kind of open house, which is propagating this openness, which was appropriated to its quality. So Jane Walk's concept of introducing this highly politicized space of public building is here at the forefront. And the last example, I hope I have a few minutes left, is the Naval Institute, one of the leading scientific but also military purposes that was designed also at the end of the 40s and the beginning of the 50s, which was the initial part of the project of the whole new town, built also in the framework of demonstrating the societal democratization and modernization of then the state and the republic and the town. But its situation is far from being optimistic at the present, because here it is part of the uncomfortable, unwanted heritage, and therefore characteristic expression of the memory stages of the void. So it is kind of the void in an urban context, now not an empty space, but a very densely residential quarter. But in this context, what is the most important now is not the architectural quality, but the price of the square meter to be reused. So it is strongly damaged. It is really in spite of these constructional or very unique spaces that are now finding its use for the theatrical sets, which are practically the only use of this fantastic architecture at the moment. So to conclude, the question I would like to pose, rather than bring the answers, it's can qualities of architectural culture in this situation be more than just iconic ruins? So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward
Thank you so much, Professor Gallier. And I already have many questions, but I'm also responsible for time discipline, so I can't self-sabotage my task here. So without further ado, I will invite our next speaker, Professor Almantas Samalavicius, who is a professor at the Department of Architectural Fundamentals Theory and Art, where he teaches architectural criticism, theories of urban culture, aesthetics of architecture, and aesthetics of landscape. He also teaches post-colonialism and media studies at Vilnius University. He's an author of some 14 books, which I will not be naming here, but you can find that in the bio. And he also serves as an editor-in-chief of the Journal of Architecture and Urbanism and Chicago-based Janus Quarterly, and his writings have been translated into 15 languages. So please join us, the floor is yours. And the presentation is entitled Behind the Curtain, Reception and Integration of Modernism in Lithuanian Architectural Discourse During the Later Soviet Era between 1970 and 1990. Thank you.
Thank you for your generous introduction. First of all, my colleague showed a documentary, and I was not planning to talk about, but it suddenly triggered my memories of how I came to Berlin for the first time. It was in 1980. It was the year of DDR, but by miraculous coincidence, I ran into a group of Americans, documentary filmmakers, who were making a movie on Pergamon Museum. And I got involved with that project, and I became the main protagonist of that documentary, in which I played myself. I was walking through the spaces, and they were following with a camera. So this was my first experience with Berlin, and recurrent visits for various reasons. Now, I want to contextualize my speech, and I must, of course, apologize that I cannot present an academic paper in 10 minutes. It's simply impossible, so I will give a summary. But generally, I like this format because some discipline is always good. But inevitably, I have to explain a few things. Well, I do not consider myself a student of modernism because I work with slightly different things, mainly dealing what I would describe modernity, but not exactly modernism. And one of my replies to the study of modernity and modernism was a book called Rethinking Modernism and the Built Environment. And I chose quite a different attitude, not writing academic book myself. I wrote an introduction and invited a number of serious thinkers from architecture, urban studies, philosophy, anthropology, people like, you heard already some of these names, Kenneth Frampton was a part of this, Witold Rybczynski, Leon Krier, and more than 20 others. So basically, also one more thing, I opted not to use any slides for two reasons. One is philosophical, the other is practical. As I will be speaking about theoretical discourse, I could only indirectly introduce, some pictures, and I thought that might distract you from the ideas I want to discuss. The second attitude is more complicated, it's philosophical. I realized already some years ago that our contemporary, highly technologized culture has parallels with Middle Ages. In Middle Ages, people wanted images, but these were illiterate people. Now we have highly illiterate people who equally require images. It's okay with images, when we speak about architecture, visual arts, but when people in philology, I'm also involved in literary studies, they start exhibiting their text on the screen. Something is really wrong. So that's why no pictures for these 10 minutes. Now, I was concerned with quite a few things, and the reason I came to this conference that I started writing an article and I never found any time to complete it. And this call just gave me the opportunity to finalize the theme, which was already announced. Now, I would like to start my discussion with another name that was mentioned, with Martin Kohlrausch, who wrote in his Brokers of Modernity, and that book was published some 10 years ago. Let me quote, "The history of modernist architecture has mostly, with the exception of the Soviet Union, been written with a Western focus. Modernism in the East was only discovered, with some important exceptions, after the fall of Berlin Wall." And I believe this observation is still very much right. And of course, I don't know many things about that are going on elsewhere in Europe, but I know pretty well what's going on in Lithuania. And really, modernist architecture has recently been very much discussed. We have two two co-authors of a quite pioneering book on Soviet Lithuanian architecture. There were, I think now, more than a dozen of dissertations that cover various aspects of development of modernism in Lithuanian context. And now I have, I think, 5 doctoral students at 2 universities, and 4 of them are writing theses on various aspects of modernity. So modernity now and discussions of modernism is very much in demand. But I'm not going to approach this as a kind of standard architectural historian, but I was concerned, and I work with some groups like Ivan Illich Circle or International Jacques-Ellul Society. These are the people who are, they were called to the most radical critics of modernity. They go much farther than Jürgen Habermas, for example, or to that matter. And I was concerned, actually a few years ago, I observed one to my mind, very interesting thing, that at the same time when modernism was, and I am speaking now not about Stalinist time, about the later developments, which I call late Soviet period, from 1970 to 1990. Modernism was very much discouraged in visual arts, and visual artists had to show their ways, how to get into exhibitions, how to get exhibited, and so on and so on. And they were severely disciplined and punished. But nothing of the kind was going on with architects who were creating modern forms, neither with urban designers. So my hypothesis was that these were kind of 2 directions that were going on at the same time. And these both attitudes, of course, were orchestrated by the Soviet establishment. When I looked, for some, there were a lot of questions regarding the methods. Among many other things, I also did some research in memory studies. So I know that often people don't tell truth. There was recently a famous architectural historian wrote a very large autobiography, I think some 500 pages about his whole life and whatever. But the only one fact is not mentioned, that he was member of Communist Party for some 40 years. So people don't say a lot of things. So I tried to compare two texts, two books on modernism. One was written by a certain Longinas Šepetis. It was published in 1967. It was the first publication, first book about Western modernism in Lithuania. 15 years after, he rewrote this book, expanded, and in 1982 he produced a much more ambitious book. Šepetis, when he published the first version of his book Modernismo Metmenis, the outline of modernism, he was cultural minister of the Soviet Lithuania. When he published his second version, he was already the secretary of the Communist Party and was one of them, 2 or 3 top figures in the establishment. And in my written text, I have quotations showing, so to say, his discourse. I won't go into that. I won't waste time. But despite of the fact that he was stating that we need information about modernism in order so that our ideological enemies would not use it, we need information. But at the same time, he depicted modernism in visual arts in extremely negative terms, though I guess he secretly admired some of the top figures. At the same time, in 1967, he was responsible for censoring one of the first exhibitions of abstract art, the exhibition of writer and painter Romualdas Lankauskas in Vaga Publishing House. It was one of the largest publishers at that time. He was not allowed to exhibit, and coincidentally, 15 years after, he was invited by the Institute of Construction. They wanted to exhibit his work. He just immediately, when he got there, it turned out that he was cancelled, if we use the contemporary terminology. Now, the other book I compared actually was published in 1971, and it was authored by a quite well-known architectural historian, Jonas Minkevičius. And surprisingly, if you compare these two treatises, actually there is almost no ideological criticism of modernism, of any trend. He discussed a variety. Actually, he wrote about functionalism, he wrote about brutalism, about neoclassicism, and so on and so on. There were some references, of course, to Karl Marx, so to say, to his opus magnum. I call it the Bible of the Soviet times, because other books, changed, but Karl Marx and his Das Kapital was always, so to say, a guiding book. So he constructed a very, I would say, open-ended discourse. But I also noticed a very curious feature. You won't find the word modernism in this book. He only used the term new architecture. New architecture where you expect to have modernism. So to conclude my talk, which is documented much better, of course, in the paper, but I guess my time is almost going to end. I realized why these approaches differed. Soviet establishment, could not abstain, so to say, as they called at the time, to take and overtake the West. So building, construction, architecture, it had to work. So after the collapse of this socialist realism, so-called socialist realism architecture at the end of Stalinism, it abandoned, very, very soon it abandoned this discourse, and architects were privileged. At the same time, of course, they gained, there was another reason for that, because they could demolish what they called this bourgeois legacy, old buildings. So they encouraged the ambitions of architects. They gave them grounds, and you could give a lot of examples. For example, Gediminas Baravykas, he built a very famous building on the site of former cemetery. Justinas Šeibokas, he was allowed to build in the very old quarters, where today you can't move any small piece. But at the same time, modernism in visual arts, in literature, was considered to be very, very extremely dangerous, ideologically dangerous. So this was my finding and hypothesis, and I guess something can be followed by making this picture more explicit. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this amazing time discipline. We know this is a challenge, so we appreciate that. And our next speaker is Professor Svetlana Smolenska. She's a professor at Kherson State Agrarian and Economic University, Department of Construction, Architecture and Design in Ukraine. She also was born and received her architectural education in Kharkiv in Ukraine. And she's an expert and a member of a national ECOMOS Ukraine, of the Union of Journalists of Ukraine, and the author of numerous scientific articles published in architectural journals and books in Germany, Italy, Poland, Russia, and Ukraine. And her professional interests are methods of urban environment research, as well as architecture and town planning of the 20th century as a cultural heritage. And the title of the presentation is International Competition 1930 in Kharkiv, Ukraine, Modernism Beyond the Binary of East and West. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to present my research. It dedicates to the international competition for the project for a state Ukrainian theater of mass musical action for 4,000 spectators in Kharkiv in 1930. Why is that event 90 years ago of interest today? First of all, this is due to close attention to Ukraine now, to its current tragedy, and to its glorious past. In my opinion, it was the most significant international competition held in Ukraine in its history. Kharkiv was the first capital of the Ukrainian SSR in the 1920s and early 30s. The city developed rapidly at that time. In less than a decade, it became the largest industrial, educational, and cultural center, the third most important city in USSR after Moscow and Leningrad. Kharkiv was known abroad due to its modernist architecture. In those years, many European journals published photos of Держпром, the giant high-rise reinforced concrete building erected in 1925 to 28. The modernist ensemble of the new administrative square in Kharkiv, erected in the interwar period, and included Gazprom, was the largest in Europe. The Kharkiv competition of 1930 was important not only for Ukraine. It was one of the most significant international competition in the interwar modernism history. This is evidenced by its geography. Only 1/3 of 144 submitted projects were from Soviet republics. The remained 99 projects were from 11 foreign countries, from USA, from Japan, from Italy, France, Germany, Sweden, etc. For comparison, the well-known competition for the Palace of Soviets in Moscow in 1931 brought together 160 projects, and only 24 of them were sent from 7 foreign countries. It is impossible to calculate how many designers were involved in designing the Kharkiv theater. Only one team from Kharkiv, which received first prize for the project under the motto 1931, included 13 people. Such famous architects as Walter Gropius, Hans Pölzig, Belgedes, Vesnin brothers were among the nominees. The significance of Kharkiv competition is not limited to history. Studying its results may give rise to new ideas regarding modern theaters. The aim of competition was to create a theater building suitable for demonstrating any mass performance, from opera, drama, cinema to a circus performance or action with the participation of the public. The topic of modern multifunctional transforming theater has not yet been exhausted. The competition program encouraged participants to introduce the most advanced building structures, technical innovations to transform the stage, ensure the best acoustics, minimize the time of evacuation of spectators, apply lighting effects, etc. These are current challenges for modern architects as well. Despite its success, that event remained little known in architectural history for several reasons. Firstly, the theater was not built. In 1934, the capital of Ukraine was moved from Kharkiv to Kiev. Funding for the construction of this theater was stopped. Secondly, all projects and documentation were lost. Why? The results of the competition were summed up in the spring of 1931. And in 1932-33, the official ban of modernism in the USSR began. Storing modernist drawings became dangerous. Plus, the occupation and the destruction of Kharkiv during World War II did not give up hope to preserving the originals. Only photocopies of original projects and their reproductions in the architectural press of the 1930s, as well as original preparatory drawings in the archives of the nominees of the Kharkiv competition, can be found now. A few words about the organization of the competition and the work of the jury. In 1929, the Ukrainian government initiated the construction of a modern giant theater for 4,000 spectators in the capital, Kharkiv. It was decided to announce an international competition to attract a wide range of specialists from abroad in order to realize such ambitious intention. Preparation for the competition lasted a whole year. Then an international competition was announced in July 1930. Its program was colorfully designed by Kharkiv modernist artist Adolf Strachov and was published as a book in 5 languages. Reputable specialists related to theatrical art were involved in the jury. Their names were announced in the competition program. December 25th was the deadline for the meeting projects. The competition was mixed. Everyone could participate in an open competition, and at the same time, 15 projects were commissioned from leading architectural societies and universities. All projects had to be submitted anonymously under a motto to eliminate jury bias. Authors of the winning projects were announced. The names of the other participants remains unknown. Detecting projects and their authors is one of the main tasks of my research. So many projects were submitted to the competition that the jury was forced to work for several months for 2 stages. At the first stage, projects were divided into 3 categories. At the second stage, projects of a first highest category were awarded by the jury or offered for purchase. 12 cash prizes were distributed. The ordered projects did not receive monetary compensation as they had already been paid for. The ordered project under the motto 2 rings crossing each other was recognized as the best among all. The famous modernists, Vesnin brothers, were its authors. 3 projects from America, Alfred Kastner from New York, from Germany, Zdenka Strižić, who was Hans Pilecki's student, and from Ukraine, I showed it to you before, from Kharkiv received the first prize. Now about 1/3 of the projects of Kharkiv Theater have already been discovered. The names of many authors have been established through my research. But Kharkiv competition is still full of mysteries. And I ask your help if you know something about nominees of this competition, please give me to know. 14 of the best projects and originals of the preparatory drawings of Kharkiv Theater by 2 German architects, Hans Pilecki and Otto Kotz, are shown at the exhibition in 2 architectural museums these days, and I invite you to visit it this Saturday, please. I invite you. And something else. This is that exhibition. The relevance of studying the Kharkiv competition, in my opinion, lies in the fact that it is an inspiring example of the international cooperation in a peaceful creative field such as architecture. I sincerely wish peace to all of us and dream that Ukraine will finally have the opportunity to return to creation, to events like the Kharkiv competition that unite people from different countries. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And the last speaker in our session is Katarzyna Solińska. She's an art historian and independent researcher, currently working with the Voivodeship Monuments Protection Office in Krosno, Poland. She's a graduate of the Exercising Modernity Academy in 2022 and the V4 Heritage Academy in 2023 in Budapest. And she is also a laureate of the year-long scholarship of the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage of the Republic of Poland. And she will be speaking today about tracing papers, lost archives and forgotten narratives, hidden and silenced microhistory of the death German architect, his Trans-All, the opponent, and modernism beyond Subcarpathian region. Kasia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and it's really great I can present the effects of the year-long scholarship and why. Why tracing papers, this got two meanings. One, like tracing paper, the tool that architects use, kind of layout paper, and second, as the act of tracing, of discovering and searching these designs, projects, which is really important because as working in the Monuments Protection Office, we need the tool, the reason to protect some buildings. And we got a big problem with the modernism and the neglection of modernism, especially in the regional style and point of view. And the second reason, as you mentioned, last year I prepared this podcast about architects and collecting the interviews. I've asked the one owner of the building if he knows who is the architect who designed his mansion, his villa, and he said, I'm not sure, Bergman, Doberman, who cares? So the main question is, who cares? And this was the part of my scholarship. Yes, many tracing paper. Like a multi-layered history is out there. And for the first time I saw it's like a jigsaw puzzle and how I will puzzle it out and discover this particular history of this architects. What I focused on, this is the doodle on the margin of one of the projects, and it's also showing the more human side face of this architecture. Not only this big history of the architecture in Krosno, but also this more human face of their story. And in the middle of this we can see Krosno, the name of the town where they mostly the building were. And for the I want to show you where the Krosno is, and this is a map. And this, I really like this map because it's showing not only the Second Polish Republic, but also this part of Europe. And first thing, this map, we can see like different strange numbers, and we have the we need the key to read this map. Here is the key, because this map was used to measure, to calculate the distances between the towns, which was really important in case, because in these towns were the oil stations before the World War II. And here is Krosno, and here is Berlin. So we can see, and with this, we can measure the distance between those two towns, cities. And okay, so we will focus on Krosno, which is here, and we can see the situation of this particular town, and to zoom in to focus on the situation of the architects in Krosno, particular two architects meeting in maybe also those crossroads. First, Stanisław Bergman, and second one, Alfred Jan Koder. And we, if we want to compare these two architects, Stanisław Bergman, Alfred Jan Koder, we can see that there is 15 years between them. Stanisław Bergman is older, and we can see above Stanisław Bergman, we can say that the name is sounding German, and focusing on the ethnos of those two architects, Stanisław Bergman was Głuchoniemiec, deaf German, and for example, in the Krosno region, these German-sounding names, it wasn't a stigma. For example, I've got neighbors named Preisner, Reichel, Wojnar, because of the many Germans since 14th, 15th century were located there, and for them, this ethnos, Głuchoniemcy, wasn't so important, but during the World War II, it was important for the Nazis, and I will talk about it later. And Alfred Jan Koder, he was born in Bohumin, in then Galicia, but later Czechoslovakia, and he described himself as Zaolzianin, so a person who comes from Trans-Olza Silesia, and it was kind of a multicultural family, because he finished the Polish gymnasium, his sister finished German school, and his brother finished, I think, the Czech school. So for the family, it wasn't strictly necessary if they were thinking about themselves like as Czech, German, or Polish. He chose the Polish distinction of himself. And what about their projects, their designs as an architect? We can see that maybe these 15 years apart of the generation, we can also say, it's also the we can divide those architects for their designs, and we can say that Stanisław Bergman was this old school, or maybe this school more based in Lviv, that the designs were 2D, two-dimensional, when Alfred Jan Koder really liked to prepare those axonometries, these three-dimensional designs. And for example, his uncle, who was the great Polish sculptor Jan Raszka, described him like a great drafter and working as an architect. So we can say that his designs, his drafts were really fascinating and aesthetically compelling, but as an architect, he just was working and designing those buildings for money, we can say. Oh, okay. What was the catalyst of their work? First was the persona of urban planner Roman Feliński, based in Lviv, who prepared the master plan for Krosno. And this master plan we can see behind Alfred Kauder in his office. And fortunately, the original map we can find in the archives of Voivodeship Monument Protection Office. And this working and exchanging letters and some ideas between Feliński and Kauder, we can find as a kind of catalyst of creating a new modernist Krosno. Second was cooperation, co-working Kauder with Adolf Szyszko-Bohusz, who also is seen as a main modernist, main architect in Poland, and Kauder was helping to build this, to implement those projects in Rzegestów-Zdrój, this spa resort, and we can find in this private collection of Kauder family those designs, projects. Some thought it was lost forever, but I found them in this private collection, and we can see that these main designs made by Szyszko-Bohusz, they were implemented by Kauder, but also Kauder tried to design those smaller details of facades or the parts of these bigger buildings, and maybe it was also the catalyst of his own work later in Krosno. Another part, modernism, that never was. It was also I think the most intriguing part, finding those tracing paper with these projects that was never implemented, and shows kind of hybrids, kinds of really strange buildings. For example, it is the first drawing of this villa of Dr. Siegel, and it is modernization, modern redesign of this building, never implemented, never built in this kind of modernization, what we can find it quite intriguing. Second one was also collaboration with Szyszko-Bohusz and trying to build up this region called Łopata Polska. It was near Rzegestów-Zdrój, and it was supposed to build up with these small villas, small sanatoriums, spa resorts, and we can find that these projects are really compelling, like a modernism in Brno or something like that. I finding this, and I also mentioned in my abstract that what connected Kazimierz Sztuka, Grodno with Krosno. Here we can see the headquarters of Riflemen's Association Strzelec in Grodno. For many, many years, it was said that this building was designed by Kazimierz Sztuka. Some say that the plaquette on the building was saying so. Later on, the researchers discovered that it in fact is building designed by Stanisław Grochowski, regional architect from Grodno. And I try to ask why we also need this father figure, this great architect, great artist with great name to find architecture, nobilization of the architecture. And why this building? Because really a similar project was prepared by Coder in 30s, and we can compare the similar connection of minds, and why also this building is so appealing, because now it looks like this. And why? Because of Stanisław Bergman. It was the design of Alfred Jan Coder, and in something in 1944-45, this building was finished. Yeah, and it with this kind of final, final touch. And so we can ask if the Stanisław Bergman and Alfred Jan Coder was kind of cooperation, of competing with one another, or I think just the Stanisław Bergman like this picturesque kind of vibe of architecture, not the modernist one. And excavation of modernism that never was built, in fact. And first is Ukrainian Cooperative Society Selański Sojusz in Rzepnik near Krosno. And here is the project from 1939. And we can say that it's out of place, this kind of design just before World War II. But I think 2 weeks ago, I find in this private collection of Coder family those journals. This is a mark that the owner was Alfred Jan Coder. And those are designs from 1934, for example. And also we can see this vernacular kind of modernism of architecture. So if he maybe not copy-paste those kind of designs, but those exchange of ideas maybe was connected with the projects from the journals from the Berlin, for example. And Talmud Torah Supplementary Jewish School in Krosno, also the building that was never fully implemented in Krosno. So it exists only on this tracing paper that I was the first person that looked at it for the 90 years. So it's also this kind of Indiana Jones feel with finding those projects, those designs. And last but not least, Funeral Chapel in Krosno. It's supposedly designed by Alfred Jan Coder, who was an evangelist, and this is by the people living there is called the mansion villa under the goblet, because here we can see this Husid goblet, and there is no cross, no region distinction of this building. This goblet is the only one signed of maybe a purpose of this building. It was supposed to be built in 1937 around, and now it is used by the local hospital as a kind of storage dump. There are the oxygen bottles inside. So it's like this kind of neglected architecture that nobody is connected with because they just do not understand this kind of architecture and maybe can't connect with this kind of design aesthetics without any ornament and so. And what happened with Stanisław Bergman, this deaf German? There is many stories about the deaf Germans around Krosno, Chaczów. I can lead you to the great article by Wojciech Szymański. It is also available in English, when he says about this Nazi propaganda, and also is saying about this book Ze Przodków, Call of the Ancestors, when the propaganda was trying to these deaf Germans to their side. And after co-working on the Stalag Szebnie, Stalag Szebnie, Bergman disappears. Then he came back about 1946, totally broken, moving on the wheelchair, and then after World War II he never designed anything. So we can say that the working on the Szebnie concentration camp was the last work. He was forced to work on it, and unfortunately it was the last sign of him in the architectural history of Krosno. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please stay with us, and I will invite the rest of the speakers from this session to join us here. We still have some time for questions and discussion, as we started later than inscribed in the program. So please join me. And I will first check if there are some immediate questions or comments in the audience. Is there anyone who'd like to ask a question? Oh yeah, there is one. So yeah, please. Okay, the mic is coming.
I want to question Marija. You have. What do you think? Would Lithuanian architects staying in Soviet Lithuania would they have said or thought if they would have seen the Lithuanian architecture in the U.S. In the States? What does it? Would they accept that what their brethren have done there is a part of their identity, or did they ever knew about that there is a Lithuanian architecture beyond the borders?
I just want to be clear. You are asking me to comment on what Vaidas was showing about America?
Your opinion, but do you know if they...
Yeah, I know what they knew.
What did they say? How did they reflect it?
The connections, because of these emigre families, of course they had connections with those Lithuanian architects and families who stayed in the Soviet Lithuania. But if they very much shared their designs, we do not have such knowledge. Only in the very late period, like after 75, when they started exchange. At least that's my knowledge from the interviews with architects, but I think Vaidas can comment if I'm wrong or add something.
Oh, actually, yes, the connections between Lithuanians in the United States and Canada and Lithuanians in Lithuania, Soviet Lithuania, were quite intensive, surprisingly intensive, and even I think even before, because it was like letters and I don't know, mostly in form of writing letters to each other, receiving some, I don't know, postcards, and it is a quite interesting collection in Lithuanian Museum of Lithuanian Culture of Balzekas. Which starts, I don't know, maybe I mean, the postcards and letters maybe in 60s. I just have to check, but the relation was quite intensive actually. And what is the interesting point that this national style, Jonas Mulokas and others, and the debate among this really heavily related on what is happening in Lithuania. I mean, we read new books which was published in 1956, 55 about Lithuanian architecture, and we were aware, I mean, in the western part.
Thank you. I want to ask you, some of you presented actual case studies and presented us with actual examples of buildings, facilities. I wanted to ask you, what are the contemporary policies related with conserving or preserving these buildings? What are the contemporary attitudes towards the building you presented or similar buildings? Obviously, you know, with the UNESCO case, we have an answer, but is that an exceptional case in your context, or is this something that reflects a broader idea of like interest in this type of architecture? So I wanted to ask you to reflect on this, and we can start with you, Marija.
Okay, of course, I must probably I had to inform before the talk that the nomination file for the UNESCO World Heritage Center is a very special genre. And for those academic researchers, it might be a little bit complicated because it really needs simplified theses to be understood and to justify this universal outstanding value. But of course, these processes take very long, many years. And in Kaunas, it started, I think, in 2012, and Kaunas municipality established a special renovation program, which focused on the buildings built exactly in this period. Of course, it was preceded by the many academic writings, books, promotions, what Vaidas did, what Vilte did. Also, Edward Denison is present here. He also wrote the comparative analysis. So it's a lot of work, preparation work, which usually takes 10 years for the single nomination. So it might have looked like a very simplified version of what has been promoted, but for me it is very important, and I don't want to afraid that the positive narrative that we constructed, this architecture of optimism was very well received by the residents of Kaunas, and really involved them in recognition of their heritage and in different bottom-up programs like renovation, restoration, excursions, visits, workshops for wooden door renovation, etc., etc. And it has a lot of bottom-up movements that, in a way, were united by this narrative. So I think that it is a successful narrative that helped to put all these 10,000 buildings together.
I want to follow up on this. So you think that it was the narrative, the narrative that was positive and appealing that actually made these people involved and like made them recognize this architecture as being of value? You think it played a part?
It played a part. Of course, the basis is the beautiful architecture. Beautiful environment, very harmonious environment, urban environment. And of course, it was the main trigger to start this nomination, and many people were attracted by the beauty of the buildings. But in a way, for the common grounds, for something to be told and united, I think good narrative is necessary.
And also a positive one, as you stressed. I think it might be of importance. And I want to also now ask you to comment on that, because you also showed us like many examples. And I wanted to ask you again about the policies. What, if there are, and what kind of policies in place? How do you know how these buildings are being treated or qualified? If there are any programs attempting to preserve them.
There
The most cases, the most these case studies I have showed in the presentation has the status of protected heritage. So there is a kind of broad conscience about the architectural quality, but when it comes up to the reality, then it's utopian, because reality is quite different from formal protection. So the most optimistic situations we have with the perception where tenants, for example, this residential skyscraper, which is really protected by the public, and this activism or bottom-up initiative, which was successful as a kind of collaborative project involving not just academic society and artists, but also the community, is the most successful one. So the beginning was like researching, and art historians and historians of architecture, etc. They were doing research, and they were promoting the quality by producing films or publishing articles or monographs on architect. So this was kind of cutting-edge research, and promoting with making this architecture visible, really visible in the public. So and as a result, now we have a huge growing interest of not just professionals, but ordinary people, so to say, not just in this particular case, but in architecture as a phenomena of this quite particular period, and which is really changing the perception. But the politics is, I would name it more lack of politics, in a sense that there is a lack of strategy on the level of the making decisions. So centers of power are quite remote from this kind of practice still, and that's the reason of the completely devastated complexes that are now abandoned or left to further demolishing. So we have these examples in the city centers, not just in the environmental areas which are remote from the urban culture. So the globally, I would say that it is a big problem of the stages, and there is still a lot of work to do to change this from the bottom.
Thank you. And also, Kasia, you represent an office, which is also a very particular position. And you also showed us some examples of, either like renovated or neglected buildings. So tell us how it works in your case, in the case that you were investigating.
Oh, there is no policy of protecting those kind of buildings. For example, most of them 2-3 years ago, they were anonymous, no background, no history about the architects connected with those designs. So it is really, really difficult to protect that kind of architecture. And if the owners of those villas, mansions, even them don't see this architecture as valuable. So it's really, really difficult to protect it. So the main case, for example, for me, my research was to collect all the evidence of those architects and just list all the buildings designed by them to create the argument to protect those buildings, but it's still not so easy. For example, this funeral chapel. I think that it is and it will be kind of dump for the hospital, and it's really difficult because it's not. Sorry, I'm not using English in daily basis, so it's really, my brain is switching off this language app. So it's really difficult to protect this kind of architecture. And as I mentioned, the Alfred Coder was really skilled drafter, and his designs are really nice, and for example, we can create interesting exhibition with his draft, but the real buildings are not looking so great nowadays. So it's really hard to again see them as the valuable as they were where they were built.
Yeah, also I think the work that you're trying to do, as I understood it, is an attempt to then raise awareness and probably create an appealing narrative that can organize this bottom-up energy around the care, the bottom-up care for these kinds of buildings. Thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments?
I was wondering, a lot of you were kind of working with film, so how do the media actually help or transform these narratives, or are there any strategies you figured out that kind of, are useful in terms of spatial explanation or whatever?
Who'd like to pick up this question? Yeah.
My intention was to show how architecture could possibly be mediated by photography and film in the space that is not exclusively opened to specific professional public or those interested in architecture, in viewing architecture in particular context, for example, the context of exhibitionary or practices that are curating architecture in a different way. So when you are directing the documentary series for national television house, this is completely different where it is mediated to a much wider audience than those who are just visiting the exhibitions. So, or if you are communicating, you have to adopt the language in a different way than when you are curating exhibition in kind of white cube, which is the case of the most, as we all know, is the case of curating architecture. Why are exhibitions representing architecture so boring? In many cases, not understandable for ordinary people and not interesting for ordinary people who cannot perceive the quality in the way curators would like them to. So this space where photography and film are operating is, I think, much more complex in mediating architecture nowadays, after the visual turn especially. So I hope that it makes some sense to you. Would you?
I will add a short comment. There is a kind of intricate relationship between architecture and arts like photography or even film. Sometimes, especially photography, but film can do the same, You can make a very ugly building look beautiful, or you can make a beautiful building look very poor. And actually, we have I was involved in analysis of the so-called new Vilnius Center. And I've spent a lot of time making photos, and I made beautiful photos of buildings that I would describe as deeply troubling in aesthetical point of view. Now, regarding film and film narrative, I guess in countries like Lithuania, you don't have much. I don't watch television, so I don't know what's going on TV. But if you take film as a genre, there is too little money. And people who are getting this money, they are not doing films about architecture, except on certain occasions, like, for example, Kaunas Modernism, you know, when it became a really important thing.
You wanted to follow up on?
I just had a very small comment, not actually a question, to Marija's case, who was stressing the success of constructing the narrative of optimism for the community. But I was thinking that it's also a very easy case because it's the right kind of history, because there is a strong social expectation or preparedness or to be attached to the heritage of the 1930s. At the same time, you could equally successfully construct a narrative of architecture of optimism about the 1960s, but it would be much more difficult to sell it to the communities.
I was actually thinking about these two optimism, because when we proposed this concept, we thought that optimism was in the 60s. And but in this case of Lithuania, it is very interesting that we think about the optimism in the 30s from the society and the state to build this new town, new city, new capital. But in the 60s in our countries, the optimism was from top down. We were supposed to be happy under Soviet occupation. So I think it was not the real optimism, it was the imitated optimism with all these constructions. So that's why I'm an architectural historian and historian, so I always seek for the background or what's behind, how this architecture was produced, by who was the commissioner, who financed, and why in the end it was as it was. So maybe it's too academic approach, but I think in this case it worked. But it has its backlashes, of course.
A little thing, you know, in Lithuania there are quite interesting and I think very good educational projects or programs that are going to continue. For example, they are having the so-called Foundation of Architecture has open house project, where it moves from one city to another, and people they can join these excursions and they can see particular building, especially modern buildings. But the other problem is, you know, unlike Kaunas Modernism, which were basically individual houses done by gifted architects, when we moved into post-war period, so we have a lot of Prutigo type of architecture that is not worth neither technically nor aesthetically any kind of preservation. So you need to sort out, you know, because the term modernism, it covers very many different things.
Thank you. I'm not sure. Do you want to comment?
I guess we can continue with the break.
Yeah. Are there any questions or comments? If not, and the break was already mentioned, then I would like to thank you. Thank you for your amazing presentations. And we will have 15 minutes of break, and then I invite you back here for the keynote lecture. Thank you so much.